if you're anything like me, then whenever you hear about a reimagining, remake, sequel, or whatever to something that you actually care about, then you're probably a bit jaded and thinking, okay, how are they going to screw this up? But with One Piece, they actually pulled it off. Looking at the user score on IMDb, 8.4 out of 10 out of over 100,000 reviews. I mean, that's pretty good. And this interview with one of the showrunners, Matt Owens, kind of gives an insight about why this show succeeded. So scrolling down to this article from Deadline, 5 weeks into its run, Netflix's One Piece remains firmly in the streamer's weekly top 10, amassing 57.8 million views. And if you look at the Nielsen charts for right now, I mean, as you can see, it's number 2 in the overall category, but in the original category right now, it's at the number 1 spot, which is pretty remarkable considering how strange the actual story of One Piece is. And I mean, I didn't think it would be this accessible, but apparently I was wrong on this one. So this interview from Deadline was basically the first interview that the showrunner was able to really give following the release of this, because he's part of the Writers Guild, so he was on strike and couldn't talk about it. So I mean, this is the first time that we actually have some insight about what went on in the creation of this. I'm not going to read this whole interview. I'll leave a link to it in the description of this video if you want to check it out yourself. But yeah, going down here, there's a part that right here, this is what was asked to them. What did you learn from season 1 that you would like to use for season 2? And part of his answer at the end, it's also nice that for the most part, existing fans understand and like the changes that were made. I think they appreciate that it comes from conversations between Oda and I, that we're not taking this from a stance of we're changing things just to change things. Nowhere in the development of this show was it like, what's the concept? It's a rubber boy in a straw hat who's a pirate. Great, I'm going to tell my own story with that. And I think that's a good answer, because too often we see showrunners or writers of adaptations like this basically just using it as a springboard to tell their own story, because ultimately they know they're not going to get the funding to tell the story that they want. So they might find some source material that's similar enough, or they might have a sort of interest in it or something like that. And they'll be like, okay, I can pitch this to the studio because this has a big built-in fan base, so I will use this to kind of tell what and then I can just kind of like deviate from this and tell my own story. I mean, we saw that with The Witcher, where season 1 was a little bit more faithful to the source material, but I mean, it was ultimately just the writers and showrunners trying to use this as the way to tell their own story. And as the show progressed, you can see it deviating away from the source material, which is why it caused friction with the star Henry Cavill, because he was actually a big fan of the source material. But yeah, I mean, they did use this as an opportunity, like, okay, let's focus on other characters that I like in this. Let's make them more front and center. Let's try to change characterization and tweak it a little bit to be more a little bit of a self-insert. I mean, the worst case is when they just have original characters that they add to it that are complete self-inserts or whatever. Because I mean, that's just boring. And it's actually kind of arrogant to think like, okay, whoever created this is made something that a lot of people love, but I can do better. And it's like, if you could do better, you would have done better. I mean, the fact that you have to adapt someone else's material just goes to show that you're not as good of a writer as them. So you should just focus on what they actually have to say. And I think that was another big part of One Piece in the success, was the fact that they actually consulted Eiichiro Oda and gave him creative say in things. And he had veto power, so if certain scenes didn't work, he would make them reshoot it or rewrite it. And there was some things that took him convincing, and there were some changes that were made that are I'm a little iffy on. I don't necessarily think it was the most necessary, but at the same time, I understand why they made these changes, and I think that's kind of what he's talking about here, because you're getting 40 some episodes of the anime and condensing that down into 8 episodes of the live action. So changes are going to have to be made. I mean, that's just a fact. I mean, it's just minute for minute screen time. I mean, you just don't have as much of it. So you have to make some cuts and tweaks to try to make everything fit together and work. And I think that really pulled it off with this one. I mean, you don't feel like there's a minute of wasted screen time with this. Everything just keeps moving at a brisk pace, and it doesn't feel rushed either. And it really does come down to the fact that the showrunners of this and the actors, I mean, pretty much everyone who worked on this really cared about the source material and wanted to be faithful and true to it. I mean, even if they did some changes with best of intentions, also having Oda on standby to be like, okay, I understand what you're doing, but you need to go back and change it for X, Y, and Z reasons. And the fact that they had the humility to accept what he has to say is also another point in its favor. And as you can see, I mean, not only in the Nielsen charts, but I mean, just the reviews from this, I mean, 95% positive on Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, even critics seem to give it a fairly favorable review. So that's really a lesson to be learned from this. I mean, stay true to the source material, be honest with the fans, and if you can, consult the original creator and get their input on what can actually be done to make it succeed. And that's why you got this a quick renewed for season 2, and we'll see what happens with that. I mean, I'm not saying I have my doubts about season 2, but knowing what's to come, it's a pretty ambitious endeavor, and I can see why it'd be a little bit more difficult to tackle than the first season. But seeing how this actually worked, I can see them actually pulling this off. I mean, even characters like Chopper would be a bit more difficult, but I have faith that they can do this now after seeing what they have done. But let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. And if you like this video, make sure you click that like button, share the video, and subscribe to the channel if you want to stay up to date with the latest news. Thank you.